Theresa May woke today to dreadful headlines after the Salzburg summit seemed to leave her Brexit plans in chaos. As she and her aides met to respond, the press gathered in the rain as a camera was summoned to number 10 to broadcast a short speech. She was steadfast, not least on the big problem of Ireland and EU plans post-Brexit for customs checks between Britain and Northern Ireland.
It is something I will never agree to. Indeed, in my judgment, it is something no British Prime Minister would ever agree to. If the EU believe I will, they are making a fundamental mistake. Anything which fails to respect the referendum or which effectively divides our country in two would be a bad deal. And I have always said, no deal is better than a bad deal.
She never said the word checkers, but defended the cabinet deal struck there in July as the means to frictionless trade in goods with the EU. But in Salzburg, the president of the European Council said checkers won't work.
Yesterday, Donald Tusk said our proposals would undermine the single market. He didn't explain how in any detail or make any counter-proposal. So we are at an impasse.
That admission that Brexit talks had reached an impasse caused the pound to fall again. EU leaders, Theresa May insisted, should now say in detail what was wrong with checkers or do better.
Throughout this process, I have treated the EU with nothing but respect. The UK expects the same. A good relationship at the end of this process depends on it. At this late stage in the negotiations, it is not acceptable to simply reject the other side's proposals without a detailed explanation and counter-proposals.
And for the first time, she publicly assured the 3 million plus EU citizens in the UK they'll be able to stay here even if EU states don't do the same for British people.
I want to be clear with you that even in the event of no deal, your rights will be protected. You are our friends, our neighbours, our colleagues. We want you to stay.
And she repeated,
I will not overturn the result of the referendum, nor will I break up my country. We need serious engagement on resolving the two big problems in the negotiations. And we stand ready.
After the pasting she got overnight, that was Theresa May fighting back, using very plain and simple language, but angry and defiant, in what could prove to be one of the historic speeches of this long, long saga. As the PM left Downing Street shortly afterwards, Labour said the political games from both the government and the EU need to end.
The defiance of the Prime Minister is all very well, but she knows as well as we do that the Chequers proposal is not just objected to in Europe, it's objected to back here by her own party. Well, imagine the situation if she tries to take a further step to close the gap. Her own party will then challenge her.
Theresa May arrived to start the weekend in her Berkshire constituency, having sent a strong message to the continent. But will it really change anything? Well, it's not really clear whether the speech will help the Brexit talks, but there does seem today to have been a more conciliatory tone from European leaders, an effort not to escalate things. Donald Tusk, in a statement released tonight after the speech, said he remains convinced that a compromise is still possible. I say these words as a close friend of the UK, he said, and a true admirer of Prime Minister May. And Jean-Claude Juncker compared Britain and Europe to being like two loving hedgehogs. We're not at war with Great Britain, he said, but when two hedgehogs hug, you have to be careful that there are no scratches. The real significance, I think, in this speech is it may help preserve Mrs May's leadership for a while. Chequers, of course, doesn't have much support within the Conservative Party, but there were echoes of Margaret Thatcher and no, 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 and so on. And I think Conservatives will admire the way that she stood up to the Europeans, and that should help when it comes to the Conservative conference in 8 days' time.
Michael Crick in Downing Street. Well, joining me now from Broxbourne in Hertfordshire is the pro-Leave Conservative MP Charles Walker, who also sits on the influential 1922 Committee of Conservative backbenchers, of course. Isn't it a rather empty threat to say it's my deal or no deal when the EU27 know that MPs in the House of Commons will support neither?
I think the EU behaved pretty poorly over the past couple of days. I think Donald Tusk's Instagram post of the cakes and the cherry was a particular low point from a man who was a very great Prime Minister of Poland, and I'm sure he regrets doing that now bitterly. Look, the Prime Minister made it perfectly clear we want to have a good relationship with the EU. We're leaving the EU, we're not leaving Europe. I think she made a very noble statement about EU citizens, and one which most people, almost all people, will welcome. So I think the Prime Minister's in a strong position. And I personally think the EU put itself in a weaker position by its conduct yesterday. There are a lot of citizens in those EU countries who are feeling very, very disconnected from their ruling elites, and actually will be rooting for the UK, whether those people want to remain or leave in their own countries.
Why she's in a stronger position? Do you think there is a majority in Parliament for the Chequers plan, yes or no?
The Chequers plan is a white paper. The Prime Minister is negotiating off the back of the Chequers plan. I'm sure there will be changes to the Chequers plan. Some colleagues will like, perhaps some colleagues won't like. But the truth is, we are leaving the EU. We had a democratic vote, and that vote will be respected, as the Prime Minister made clear.
But do you think MPs will allow a no deal? You know, MPs will not vote through a no deal, will they?
There is going to be a deal because it is both in the UK's interests and the EU's interests for a deal. Now, these are the negotiations on the way to the deal. There's some hardball being played. There's some harsh words being spoken by both sides. But ultimately, because I believe in politics, because I believe in the power of democratic politics, I believe there will be a deal, and that's what I'm working towards, and that's what the Prime Minister's working towards. And I sincerely hope that's what the EU actually wants and itself is working towards.
But this is like religion. I mean, you just believe it's going to happen. I'm saying to you, where is her threat? If they know that even her own MPs won't back her idea, and the Parliament as a whole will not allow a no deal, they can do whatever they want.
Because it's in no one's interest for there to be an ugly and rancorous divorce. It's just not in the interests of the EU, Germany, France, two of the largest economies in the world. It's not in the interests of the UK, the fifth largest, sixth largest economy in the world. It is in no one's interests for this to end badly, because if it does end badly, it actually undermines the legitimacy of the EU in the eyes of many of its citizens. And people need to remember that. This is the big time. This isn't the time of jokes about cherries and cakes. This is really grown-up politics, and we will get a deal.
Let me just turn to Justine Greening here in the studio, who is the former Education Secretary and, of course, has called for a a new referendum on Brexit, a three-way referendum to allow the people to decide. Can we work out, what do you think of this today? I mean, there is no majority in Parliament for anything that's on the table at the moment, is there?
I don't believe so. That's what I was saying earlier in July. I think that's just a reality. It's not something I particularly welcome. I admire the Prime Minister for taking a tough stance, but I think she would be in a better position if she was bringing back a deal that we knew would have the support of the British people and Parliament. And I do think we now need to try and find a route through. And from my perspective, I think the responsible thing would be to not just hope that that deal she brings back is one that is a good deal, is to actually find out from the British people whether that's what they think.
But how do you think this actually works? I mean, let's assume for a moment that Chequers or something like it doesn't get carried by the House. The House is then facing a no-deal Brexit. You believe the House of Commons will stop that, don't you?
I can't see a majority for a no-deal Brexit.
So does that actually stop no-deal happening?
Well, I think that's the question, because, of course, the House of Commons can table all sorts of motions, but I think in the end what would be needed is for the government to listen to what MPs were saying in the House of Commons, to respond to any parliamentary motions that went through against a no deal. And I think it comes back in a way to the point that Charles Walker, I think, was alluding to, which is Brexit isn't a moment. This is about how we take the next step in Britain's future, but also, to some extent, in Europe's future as well. And we've got to remember that all those relationships need to be constructive ones that will allow our countries to be able to work together in the future. So this isn't about winning a particular moment or a particular vote. It's actually about something far more fundamental than that, which is finding a resolution to Brexit that the British people can accept and live with and buy into, with all of the challenges that will lay ahead, whatever route we take, but also managing to maintain relationships with the EU. And I agree with Charles. I think that the way in which the European leaders dealt with our Prime Minister was not right. And I think they do need to show respect for the vote that we had 2 years ago. I think they do need to show respect for the proposals that we're putting on the table. But I would also say that in the end...
Which proposals? Because you don't respect the proposals on the table at the moment, do you? Do you think
my view is
idea?
that the Chequers deal is not workable. But what I'm saying is that's my personal view. I think we should be listening to the views of the British people.
But what are they supposed to respect? You know, what
MPs.
is Europe supposed to respect that it's not currently respecting?
Well, I think they need to look at the proposals Theresa May has brought forward. But I also would equally say that we need to finalise the proposals on the Northern Ireland border, which clearly are absolutely crucial, not just for Northern Ireland, but for Ireland itself. And these are the thorny issues that now need to be very rapidly worked out. And it does concern me that we're 2 years down the line from the Brexit vote. There's some fundamental pieces still not in place. And, of course, the clock is ticking. And I think...
But Theresa May can't bring a second referendum, can she? I mean, she's made it utterly clear that she will not do that. She doesn't believe that's respecting the referendum.
And I heard her say that as well. I'm a pragmatist. You know, I did not come into politics to spend all day, every day talking about Brexit. The things that I really care about are opportunity, social mobility, the economy, housing, all of that. But I think we have to now stop going round in circles. We need to be able to draw a line under Brexit and move on. And what I'm saying is I think there are different ways to do that. A referendum is the route that I think is best likely to do that.
But given she won't...
The PM doesn't agree.
Yeah, well, given she can't agree to a referendum because she said under no circumstances... And if you think Parliament would vote against a no deal, she then has to go, doesn't she? So what happens then to stop Brexit going ahead on March the 29th? Well,
I think what will happen is you'll probably see some sort of a vote in Parliament against no deal. And in a way, one of the reasons I was, during summer in July, raising all these issues is this is a constitutional crisis for the UK that we need to have a route through. And there's no point just saying...
But what is the route? That's what I'm saying. Well, is it a government of national unity?
I don't think it's clear to any of us exactly what that route will be, or indeed the timelines as to how we would buy some time to be able to formulate what the next steps would be. What I do know is that on behalf of the British people, we shouldn't just dismiss this potential route that we're going down and actually ignore some of the consequences of it. And we need to, as a parliament, I think, on behalf of people, really get ahead of that curve. And it may be the PM comes back with a deal that Parliament passes. I don't believe that's likely. I don't believe Parliament will support no deal. And I don't want us to simply reach that moment and not have any kind of thinking around how we then, as a Parliament, not just a government, navigate Britain through what is a crucial period.
Justine Greening and Charles Walker, thank you both very much.
I'm joined now by Alastair Campbell, Tony Blair's former Director of Communications and now a supporter of a second Brexit referendum. Alastair Campbell, Theresa May has strengthened her position, hasn't she, by standing up to the EU bullies?
Do you believe that?
Well, I'm believing what cabinet ministers are telling me. They think she's been strengthened.
She may be trying to be strong, but this has not strengthened her. We're becoming a national embarrassment, a global embarrassment in Britain. And I'm afraid that, you know, it's not all down to her, because what I'd say in her defence is that Theresa May, she's not the reason why Brexit is going wrong. Brexit is the reason why Brexit is going wrong. And I think that yesterday, you know, what happened yesterday is that the lies on which they won and the fantasies on which she's been negotiated, they were confronted with reality. How many times has she been told they're not going to play around with the rules of the single market?
But the EU humiliated her, and that makes your argument for a second referendum much harder, doesn't it?
I don't agree. Look, the thing about Donald Tusk and his stupid picture with his stupid cake, right? It's trivial and it's silly. It was a stupid thing to do, right? But on the substance of this, there's the Prime Minister. She triggers Article 50 when she didn't need to for her party. She calls an election that she doesn't need to get a landslide that she doesn't get, for a mandate she no longer has. She gives £1 billion to the DUP to stay in power. She spends 2 years with that charlatan Johnson and the incompetent Davis putting together a plan which she never hears them saying, excuse me, this is not going to work. Okay, not working with your party and not working with Europe.
So given all those things you've set out, if you were her director of comms, what would you have advised her to do?
When?
Yesterday at Salzburg.
When she was confronted with it. Well, I would have advised her not to put herself in a position where the blindingly obvious at some stage was going to happen.
Well, it's too late, though. She's got herself in that position. How would you have advised her to get out of it?
If I'd have felt I was working with somebody so incompetent in a government so divided, I wouldn't have been there.
OK, but...
And
this might make sense in your little Westminster bubble. You know, you're
I'm not in the Westminster bubble.
OK, you're in the North London bubble.
No, I'm in a national bubble where the country is getting sick to death of the mess that these people are creating.
Except that Labour pro-Brexit voters will actually just think, actually, you know, good on the Prime Minister for standing up for these EU... Cabinet Minister Penny Mordaunt tweeted today that EU intransigence is actually increasing support for Brexit. If you got your referendum, you might find that you lose it again.
Well, may I say then, shall we put that to the test? I mean, Penny Mordaunt can say what the hell she wants. She's part of this ludicrous cabinet that has spent 2.5 years failing to agree a strategy.
Oh, that's also Labour's failed to agree a strategy.
Well, I'm not going to pretend that I'm 100% supportive. Frankly, I shouldn't be here because, you know, we've got a country that is a government in crisis. We've got a country, the biggest issue, and you can't even get a Labour frontbencher on here.
But hasn't Jeremy Corbyn actually been rather clever tactically? He's kept all those Brexiteer Labour voters on side by keeping all options open.
Honestly, you keep giving me these generalised statements about what everybody's thinking. What most people are thinking at the moment is this is a mess. Whatever it was we thought we were voting for, it wasn't this. The Leavers, most of the Leavers, the Rees-Moggs, Farages, they hate it because of the kind of half in. The half out. People like me hate it because it's just kind of chaos and useless and worst of all worlds.
And a lot of people just want it over and done with.
Yes, but what is it? There has to be an it that becomes a treaty. And it's not the European Union's job to tell her, when she says, mine is the only plan on the table. Sorry, is Macron supposed to sit down? I know what Britain should do to get the best deal out of this. I mean, the whole thing. Look, they won the campaign on lies and they've negotiated on fantasies. And yesterday, the fantasies hit a bit of reality. Now,
OK, let me put a fantasy to you. You fantasise about Tony Blair leading a centrist party.
No, I don't.
You don't?
No.
You accept he's toxic?
What on earth are you suddenly talking about centrist? I'm not interested in a centrist party.
You mentioned fantasies. I was talking about
Tony Blair. Yes, well, have your own fantasies. I don't have that one. I am not interested.
You accept there's no prospect of a centrist
party? I am not
party.
remotely interested. I am interested at a key moment in our history from doing whatever I can with the voice that I have, working with the People's Vote campaign, to try to confront the arguments that have not thus far been confronted about what damage this is going to do to the country. And I think that what happened yesterday was that the country realised, hold on a minute, all the stuff you said was going to be easy is not easy. Yes, I thought it was silly that she was humiliated. No need for that.
Okay.
But Macron absolutely nailed it. He told the truth. We've been led into this by liars. We're now being governed by fantasies, and it's time that they got real.
Alastair Campbell, thanks very much.